Welcome back to a new episode of the Geographic Profiler. Please don't forget to hit those like and subscribe buttons. Today, we are jumping back into geographic profiling, and we are going to look at Wesley Brownlee, also known as the Stockton Serial Killer. Brownlee terrorized the city of Stockton, California between April 2021 and September 2022. Brownlee was responsible for 7 shooting deaths and 1 non-fatal shooting. At the time the shootings were taking place, I reached out to law enforcement, but my calls were not returned and I was not consulted on this case. Most of the information that I am going to show you here today, I posted on my X account at the time the shootings were taking place. You can find me on X at @thegeoprofiler. You can also find me on Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Blue Sky under the same handle. The first thing I did in creating my profile is I started with a map of Stockton, California, which you see here behind me. I've only been to Stockton once in my life, so needless to say, my firsthand knowledge of the area is limited. The geographic profile that I developed relied completely on satellite imagery. All right, we have our image of Stockton, California, so let's start adding information in, dissecting these crimes, and show how geographic profiling could have helped catch a serial killer. The first thing I did was I added in all the attack sites. We see that we have a loose cluster of 5 attacks up near the top of our map, and then we have this one isolated event down near the bottom. The 5 attacks near the top of the map, those were the fatal shootings. This attack near the bottom, which seems to be an isolated event, that was our lone survivor. Now, before we move on, I want you to ask yourself, why would these attacks be separated? Why would we have a loose cluster near the top of this map and this one isolated event down below? Why would you be more active in a specific area of your town or city and less active in another area? If you've watched my previous geographic profiling videos on the Long Island serial killer and the night marauder, you may have an idea of what I've done here next. This weird red polygon shape is a convex hull. It connects all the outermost points that we're interested in. In this case, it's the attack sites. This convex hull is there to give us a visual of where our suspect is operating. Whenever there appears to be a loose cluster or no cluster, I always like to add in Cantor's circle theory as well. I'm not going to get technical on you. The circle theory is simply a circle that connects the 2 outermost points that you're looking at. I like to add in the circle theory because if there's a loose cluster or there appears to be no cluster, then it is likely that our offender has a broader knowledge of the area. This means that our suspect's awareness space, comfortability, and familiarity of the city is going to be greater. Now, we are only going to focus on the 5 shootings that proved fatal. Our lone survivor was the first attack in the Stockton area, and for whatever reason, our offender did not continue to victimize people in this area. I have a few theories as to why this occurred, but let's walk through this together. When looking at a serial offender, we want to ask ourselves, why are clusters or isolated events separated? One answer could be that there's a land feature, either natural or built, that is separating those clusters. In this specific case, we see that the Calaveras River transverses east-west directly through Stockton and separates our loose cluster from our isolated event. What does that mean? It could mean nothing. However, prominent land features such as rivers, major highways, railroad tracks can act as mental barriers. A mental barrier is just like a physical barrier such as a wall or a fence. But rather than physically containing us to an area, it mentally contains us to a specific area. In creating my profile, the next thing I did after isolating this loose cluster and including the Calaveras River as a potential mental barrier, I looked at how this offender was committing these crimes. It appeared that our offender was traveling on foot to commit these crimes. Knowing that our offender was traveling on foot, I wanted to see how our offender may get from one place to another in Stockton easily on foot without being noticed. Before I tell you what these pink and green lines on this map mean, think of how you might get across a city on foot without being noticed. Looking at Stockton, I noticed that it has a rail line traversing the city north-south, which are these pink lines on this map. I also noticed that there is a prominent walking path heading through the city east-west, which is the green line on this map. You can start to see that these routes line up pretty well with where our attacks occurred. While I didn't put it on my initial profile, I also outlined Pacific Avenue on this map in black. Pacific Avenue may be another route which our offender was familiar with. Ask yourself why these routes may be so important to identify. If I'm working this case real time and I'm providing law enforcement with investigative strategies and recommendations, I might suggest that they focus their efforts along these routes. Law enforcement could then canvass, look for evidence, or install video surveillance along these routes. I didn't include this in my initial profile on Twitter or X. Here, we are going to try and identify an awareness space for our offender. This loose cluster of attacks appears to be happening north of the Calaveras River, west of our rail line, east of the US number 5, and south of Hammer Lane. Identifying an awareness space for our offender lets investigators focus their efforts. You always want to ask yourself, why this area? Why is this the offender's awareness space? What is it that is containing our offender to this area? If you notice, this area is contained by mental barriers. The rail line to the east, number 5, to the west, Calaveras River to the south are strong examples of mental barriers. Hammer Lane to the north is a lesser example of a mental barrier, but it can still act as such. There are other mental barriers here that may be restricting the movement of our offender. If you notice, there are some more expensive areas of the city just outside of this awareness space that we've identified. Spanos Park to the north, Lincoln Village and Brookside to the west, and the University District down south. Within the initial awareness space that we identified, you also have the Swenson Park Golf Course area, Quail Lakes, Venetian Bridges. These are all more expensive areas of the city, and you can see that in that area, there are no attacks occurring. Think about what this new information in our geographic profile might tell investigators and potentially criminal profilers if they're involved in the case. So if you were a geographic profiler, what would you do next? Well, in this case, I drew these yellow circles around each attack site. Put in my initial profile that our offender likely has anchor points in most, if not all, of these circled areas. We are now going to remove a lot of the information on our map and just focused on those areas that are circled. I should also mention that from here on out, all the information I'm going to show you is information that was not included in my initial profile because it is information that was gathered after our suspect was apprehended. So now law enforcement has a suspect, Wesley Brownlee. A quick search of Wesley Brownlee shows us that he either currently or previously resides in 3 of these 5 areas. The green pins are his current and most recent addresses, and the yellow pins are previous addresses. Now, we are going to add in the residential history of his most immediate family members. And now we have hit all 5 of our circles within that awareness space. And if I move back, we'll see that the area where the initial attack in Stockton occurred, the one with the survivor, we got pretty close. We have 4 previous residential addresses of Wesley Brownlee's family within a close proximity to that circle. If you're looking at a serial offender, always keep in mind that there's a reason they're attacking where they are attacking. And whether you have one cluster, multiple clusters, or no clusters, there's a reason they picked that site. In this case, with Wesley Brownlee, it appeared that we had a loose cluster. Some may even argue no cluster. But maybe it wasn't the attacks that were clustered. We now see that Brownlee wasn't necessarily attacking in a cluster. He was attacking near clusters of anchor points made up of current and previous residential addresses of him and his family. Let's add back in our red pins for our attack sites, and we can see that Brownlee was attacking victims directly beside where either he or his family lived. There is one more cluster that's very important here, and that's this little cluster right at the bottom. This is the most concentrated cluster because there are the most points in the smallest area. As a geographic profiler, I was very interested in this area. Why did Wesley Brownlee not shoot any victims in and around this cluster? With a little additional investigating, I found that this is where Wesley Brownlee's mother lived and many of his family members grew up. If you've heard of geographic profiling before, you've probably heard of the term buffer zone. Now, traditionally, a buffer zone is usually around an offender's residence. It's an area where they don't offend because it's too close to home. They're afraid of being noticed. They're afraid of being recognized. I believe that this small cluster near the bottom of this map was Wesley Brownlee's buffer zone. He had many family members from this area. He had likely visited this area because his mother lived there, and he was afraid of being recognized. I also think there's one more element to this cluster and why Wesley Brownlee did not attack there. My theory is that Wesley Brownlee did not want to attack near his mother's home, not only out of fear of being recognized, but potentially also out of a sense of shame and disappointing his mother. After our suspect was identified as Wesley Brownlee, it was found that he had previously resided in Oakland, California. On this map here, the yellow house symbol in the middle identifies where Wesley Brownlee used to live and was raised. The yellow circle, again, is the likely area where I would suspect that this offender committed crimes and was active. The green pins on this map show where the suspect, Wesley Brownlee, was previously engaged in suspicious or illegal criminal activity. The red pins on this map show the 2 homicides that Wesley Brownlee committed prior to moving to Stockton, California. I'm sure you've already noticed, but both those red pins, those 2 homicides, and where Wesley Brownlee grew up and lived are within that yellow circle. To STS Nation, you're awesome. I appreciate all the likes, the comments, the views, and the shares. You can catch more great episodes of the Geographic Profiler on Surviving the Survivor's second channel, True Crime Talk, on YouTube at STS Talk. Don't forget to check out the other great shows on True Crime Talk, Inside the Line with Rob, Dr. Detective, and Courting the Truth with Kelsey. I'm Douglas McGregor, and this is the Geographic Profiler.